Into Coke or Pepsi? Brands are our newest clans, our newest social classes. They've become points of reference in a fast-paced world. They're signals we send to others and part of the way in which we define ourselves. To some, brands are the ultimate exercise in democracy. Every moment of the day, we find ourselves voting for one brand over another. To others, they're commercial propaganda, much more insidious than political propaganda, which has never achieved such planetary scope. Today, brands shout out from the media din, drowning out the voices of the philosophers, of the thinkers. Do brands now rule our thoughts? Have they become the new gurus? In a world fast losing its bearings, are brands becoming the ultimate reference? But what exactly is a brand? Can it be defined simply and in a few words? The fact is that if brands hold such fascination for us, it is precisely because of our inability to truly define them. For example, if I say Chanel, a bottle of No. 5 immediately comes to mind. Yet the brand is much more than a single product. True, the popularity of a brand can always be traced to a product that has become famous, but the brand quickly moves beyond this single product. Today, Chanel produces handbags, jewelry, footwear, even eyeglasses. We also tend to confuse the brand with the company because they have the same name. Apart from its famous cola, the Coca-Cola Company owns many other trademarks.
A major brand is a name with a certain number of signs and logos, but it is also a name that touches us in a special way, and as such, it relies on tangible values, things we can compare, like marketing, like the product, the price, and so on. It also relies on intangibles like colors or the story it tells, none of which can be compared with any other.
Finally, we have a tendency to confuse the brand with its advertising. Yet advertising is only the most visible part of the brand. It extends its power by giving it a voice. And so, if we like Coca-Cola, it's not just for its cute polar bears, but for a host of other reasons.
People talk about branding as if it's the same as advertising, but I believe branding is the end of advertising, in the sense that advertising is about an interruption in the culture. You know, you're watching a movie, you're watching television, and it gets cut in the middle of, this is our culture, and now there's a commercial message. Branding is about flipping that order so that the brand becomes the cultural infrastructure, and we're all brand content.
In the final analysis, what is a brand? A logo, a color, an odor, a shape? In fact, it's the sum of many things. A successful blend, a kind of magic potion that appeals to all our senses. Chanel is, undoubtedly, the alter ego of Gabrielle Bonheur, also known as Coco Chanel. And, like all great brands, Chanel started as an idea before becoming a product.
Chanel numéro 5.
The interesting thing about Chanel is that it reflects feminine beauty's rise to power.
A poor small-town girl, she started her career in Paris, making hats in her Cambon Street shop. She quickly moved to fashion wear, then to perfume. In 1921, she created her famous No. 5, the only perfume to have outlived fashion trends. Today, more than 80 years after its creation, it accounts for a quarter of the world's fragrance sales. Chanel is an outstanding example since it teaches us everything we should know about a great brand. It teaches us that behind every great brand, there's a strong idea. For Coco, a feminist ahead of the times, that idea was the liberation of women.
The death of Miss Chanel in no way altered the form of the brand, since the codes which she herself created, the little black dress, No. 5, the bright red lipstick she favored, all of these have withstood the test of time and have been, to some extent, guidelines. And it is through this kind of Bible of signs, if you will, that Chanel continues to evolve through time, perpetuating the creative genius of Miss Chanel.
At regular intervals, just when the world thinks it has passed her by, Coco manages, like the phoenix, to rise from the ashes. 30 years after her death, the brand still holds the quasi-mythical status Coco sought to give it. Cars and races. The story of Chanel is a saga that has been told time and time again.
The major difference between the product and the brand is that the product is a matter of marketing, of selling, while the brand is the narration. In other words, the brand tells a story that appeals to both the mind and the heart. And so, in fact, when we talk about the myth, we are referring first to the beautiful story that is being told. And whether they are true or not, all major brands are beautiful stories.
I think what's important for the great brands is they connect past, present, and future. Okay, Pepsi-Cola's been going for 100 years plus, Coca-Cola the same, and yet they are as young and fresh to a teenager today as they were 100 years ago.
Behind every great brand lies an exciting story, and a creator who is, if not a genius, at the very least, never ordinary, and who infuses the brand with his values. It's no accident that, at the turn of the 20th century, brands tended to carry their founder's name. All of these creators had a vision of the world to which they remained firmly committed. Without this vision, the brand means nothing. In 1976, when Steve Jobs founded Apple, he was driven by the idea of a more human, more user-friendly computer. He believed that computers belonged in the home, that they were sure to become as common a household item as a television set. Macintosh computers met with tremendous success.
Yes, Apple is truly a very good brand story, because it's a transgressive story. It's about going up against the establishment, and that's how brands assert themselves.
But when Steve Jobs left the company in 1985, the long journey through the desert began. In 1996, when Steve Jobs returned, he immediately reintroduced the company's original values: democratization, user-friendliness, aesthetics. These gave rise to a new line of computer that relaunched the brand. Apple came alive again because its creator restored its true identity.
to differentiate yourself now, you've got to build on the respect that brands used to drive and add emotion. IBM's a wonderful company, the ThinkPad's a wonderful product, but do you love it? You put an iMac on your desk from Apple and people come up and they stroke it, they touch it, they lick it, they look at what's in the back. It's a love mark. They love Apple. You know, they love iMac.
The fact is, brands meet a very human need, the need to know and, by the same token, the need to trust. They make our lives easier by reassuring us about our choices. They humanize the products around us.
On a eu un exemple qui était très intéressant, qui était dans
Several years ago, we had a very interesting example in the former Soviet Union, the land of no name, no logo, no brand. Consumers would check out tires looking for remaining bits of rubber in order to identify the plant that produced the tire. Based on the plant and its reputation, they had an idea of the quality of the product. So obviously, people need brands.
Vous avez une échelle de qualité. Donc en fait, très clairement, les gens ont besoin des marques.
Brands are like friends that have long been part of our daily lives. But when did these friends become so overwhelming? From Chanel to Nike, Mercedes to Gap, have brands really changed over the past century? At the dawn of the 20th century, there were very few brands. Back then, Citroën, Mercedes, and Ford were building their first cars. After conquering the West, Americans were discovering new workwear, Levi's jeans, produced by a man named Levi Strauss. And Coca-Cola was no longer being sold as medicine, but as a refreshing drink. Did anyone have any idea of how big these brands would become?
What's interesting is that the original brands, the classic brands, at the turn of the century emerged because of this manufactured sameness, the need to develop difference, or at least the appearance of difference, within the context of manufactured sameness.
In the first half of the 20th century, advertising was in its infancy. Some manufacturers, like André Citroën in France, already had a feeling that it would become a powerful tool for reaching people.
I think that at the turn of the last century, there was what I would call an innocence about the way brands were managed. And brands like Michelin have always been beautifully managed, but instinctively so.
After World War II, however, the pace picked up. Driven by the baby boom, consumer industries around the world started to invent and produce. And with the variety of products came competition. There was no longer just one refrigerator or one washer. Now there were 10. And branding became a tool for differentiating a product in the eyes of consumers.
Tiens, mets ton taille à l'épreuve. Nous allons faire ton lavage moitié dans ton détergif, moitié dans taille. Et puis, comparons les deux.
Everywhere, the economy is in full bloom and brands are flourishing.
Il y a de la joie, avec du coke la vie est belle, il y a de la joie. Quand vous buvez Coca-Cola, vite et froid, c'est de la gaieté qui étincelle quand on boit un coke vite et froid.
In the early 1950s, the introduction of a new medium, television, had a major impact on the evolution of branding.
Un Coca-Cola, ça se voit à toute heure. Un Coca-Cola, c'est la vie.
It marked the shift from product-centered advertising to lifestyle marketing, advertising that created an image. It was at this time that Coca-Cola first became a symbol of the zest for life.
Là où il y a de la joie, il y a place pour Coca-Cola. Là où il y a du coke, il y a de la joie.
How do you feel when you're in love? Boy, you feel up. Lifetime love affairs are fantastic things. America has a lifetime love affair with Coca-Cola. Yeah, you know, we took the Pepsi challenge and Pepsi tastes better. We don't care. We don't care. We love Coca-Cola.
And within this framework of managing consumer relations, another brand would innovate.
Just Do It. It's kind of like an incentive to get you to perform at a higher level, to leave all your doubts behind, your inconsistencies, your lapses, and if you can do that, not only in athletics, but in education, in school, on your job, in your relationships with other people, then it's a positive thing.
Phil Knight founded Nike in the early 1970s, selecting a name that was not only similar to his, but more importantly, meant victory in Greek. His objective? To beat Adidas, then the leader on the running shoe market. Thanks to the charisma of marathon runner Steve Prefontaine and new technology, Nike quickly emerged as the best shoe of its era. But Phil Knight realized that more important than his product were his brand's values. In 1992, he implemented a major strategic change. Nike focused on sales and marketing rather than on simply manufacturing shoes. With this move, Knight, the visionary, introduced what has been dubbed the marketing of ideas. From then on, Nike advertising campaigns would no longer be selling products, but rather a symbol, an idea, victory at all costs.
Nike started off as a terrific product. Then Phil Knight and his group developed it into a terrific brand with great icons of the swoosh and Just Do It. And then, thanks to one guy, Michael Jordan, it became a love mark. And it transcended brands, it transcended sports, it transcended fashion. And, you know, they had all the other heroes and so on, but Michael Jordan, I believe, single-handedly turned it into a love mark.
And the significance of the Nike project is that they, in a sense, entered into competition while they started off just sponsoring sporting events. They entered eventually into competition with the teams and with the sporting events, with the Olympics, where they started to see we're all in the same business now. We're all in the sporting business. We're all selling sports.
Today, Nike is a company where marketing rules. Its ads are among the world's most eagerly awaited and appreciated. With the marketing of ideas, Nike opened up new avenues. In the 1990s, many other brands entered the fray using the same recipe. How should we feel about this type of strategy? Could they be selling us hot air with their ideas? Even that giant, IBM, changed its communications in a rather spectacular way.
Now, if you look at IBM's ads now and you know, 1994 on, you stopped seeing computers in their ads. It became about the idea of communication. It came about the idea of globalization. They were selling solutions for a small planet. They were selling solutions for e-business. The computers were almost a sort of tableau. They were a tool, and what they were selling was this idea.
Brand managers took their lead from the creators so as to develop the commercial power of their brands.
That works. It works. Yeah, it works. And it's simple. It's 3 frames, you know.
From now on, the advertising agencies were also involved in determining the future of brands. The quest for expansion led to more segmented tasks. The days of improvisation were over. Branding experts now ruled. In 100 years, we've gone from brands born of conviction and based on the quality of the product to postmodern brands, which are artificial constructs and often promoted in cynical or ironic terms. Such brands are as concerned with their images as they are with their products. Today, a good brand is, first and foremost, a formidable asset. Therein lies the company's heart and its primary value. Financiers consider Coca-Cola to be the world's leading brand, estimating its value at close to $69 billion US. Could it be that somehow, in their quest for ever-expanding markets, these colossal brands lost some of their original authenticity?
Lively competition stimulates effectiveness. Call it calculated, call it strategic value. But in the end, we are in an economic war where brands are what I would call the emblems or the weapons.
Authentic or opportunistic, brands have never stopped evolving, adapting. Nowadays, brands aren't spontaneously invented anymore, but rather act as a mirror, carefully responding directly to our needs and desires in order to better influence us. But just how far does this influence go? For a long time, man defined the brand. Have we now reached a point where it's the brand that defines the man? Oddly enough, there is no scientific data on the influence of brands. And yet, traces of this influence are all around us, on us, and inside us. We can easily recognize and name hundreds of logos, but most of us would be hard-pressed to name more than a dozen plants.
In short, today's brands have in a way become our deities, what the Romans called their household gods, those delightful, familiar, kindly domestic deities that were part of their lives, the way brands are in ours.
Some brands become generic names, designating a class of product, like Frigidaire or Kleenex. Coca-Cola is the world's most widespread word after OK. You'll even find it in the dictionary. The 5,000 or so brand names familiar to Western consumers may actually qualify as the first universal language. These days, people embody brands. And in fact, some famous people are brands themselves.
I think brands are becoming more and more influential because we have so many choices. And life is very busy. We live in the attention economy. We're being bombarded with choices all the time. So you reach for something that you know, that you trust, that provides you with what you need. And that's a brand.
Pour moi, une marque, ça représente la qualité qu'on peut associer à un produit.
It gives us comfort in knowing that, in the knowledge that something's going to be of a certain standard. Obviously, no matter what it is, even if it's McDonald's hamburgers, you know what you're getting. So that's what why brands are important, obviously.
Ça représente ce que t'es, franchement, une marque.
These major corporations, they take this style from the urban kids, from the streets, from the ghetto. They see how they dress. It's a form of expression, and they know it from in the ghetto, like in the urban, people like big logos, you know.
Je pense qu'aujourd'hui, les marques nous influencent surtout dans le sens où ça permet de montrer qu'on appartient à une certaine classe sociale, quoi.
Honnêtement, on est des fashion victimes. Honnêtement.
How did we get to this point? In Western society, individualism is unquestionably one of the trends on which the strength of major brands has been built.
Basically, individualism is something of a virtue, because there was a time when the individual didn't matter. There was the tribe, the clan, the extended family, etc. Finally, we started to focus on the individual, the man at the heart of evolution, a sense of progress, of humanity and all that. That's fine, of course, and valid, and in my view it represents completely alienated from society as a collective whole.
Aliéné par rapport à la collectivité.
Everyone wants to be different from everyone else and looks for ways to stand out. Brands are a fast and highly symbolic way of doing just that. It's a huge paradox. We want to be different, and so we focus all of our differences on what we consume. We're all different, yet we're all brand consumers. The brand has almost become humankind's lowest common denominator.
In other words, the brand is rooted in the individualism of our societies. It starts from people's anxieties and gently but very explicitly, without really deceiving anyone, it communicates a personality produced industrially, a personality of the masses. The harder it is for us to know who we are, the more we will tend to gravitate towards this form of consumption. And that is why brands target children and adolescents, who are at the best transitional ages, ages when they are uncertain of their identity.
Kids belonging to Generation Y, those born after 1980, and more importantly, the tweens, are undoubtedly the segment of the population most concerned by and about brands. For this generation, more than any other, the brand is their identity.
Moi, ma marque préférée, c'est Parasuco. Parce que les filles aiment ça quand les gars portent ça. Puis j'aime ça, les sortes de vêtements qu'ils font, jeans, toutes sortes de vêtements qu'ils font.
Moi, j'adore Parasuco parce que c'est mon style, j'adore, puis ça fait bien.
I think that young people today are more vulnerable than we were when we were young, because they live in an environment that is also more vulnerable to this. That's how I feel. For example, I notice that my grandchildren are very attached to certain brands, certain habits, certain clothes.
I think that you have a lot of sort of different parallel trends going on in this generation, where some of them have really adopted the whole branding sort of ethos and idea and philosophy completely, and they're like, yes, I am in the Nike tribe, and are tattooing themselves, and clearly the desire to mark oneself and that to say I am part of something larger than myself, I'm part of this group. This is the most basic tribal instinct that exists.
Nous on porte plutôt les Buffalo, jean Levi's. On va dans une boîte en fait qui s'appelle le Metropolis avec nos amis et on a tous des Buffalo, on est tous en petite jupe ou pantalon jean Levi's. Voilà.
Young people have a way of approaching brands that never ceases to amaze. This is the first generation brought up on brands. Fairies hovered over their cribs. Play School, Disney, McDonald's, Nike, Oshkosh, Nintendo, and so many more.
Joe, je pense qu'on est mort. Ouais. Puis on est au paradis.
You know, for many kids, a McDonald's is the first opportunity to make a choice that's not parental driven. A Coke or a Pepsi says something about you when you're 14 years old, for 50 cents. Well, boy, when you're going through those years of low self-esteem and all that kind of stuff, a brand can be a useful prop and a useful tool.
Very early on, young people learn what's cool and what's not.
Suzy, est-ce que tu veux...
Ok.
The fundamental principles of lifestyle branding were really developed for kids first, by Disney, by Mattel, by McDonald's, because what the classic kids advertisers know is that kids want to crawl inside a fantasy, and any parent who's ever taken their kid to a Disney film knows exactly what that means. It's, you watch the movie and then you want to live inside of it. So you want all the toys, and you want to go to the theme park, and you want to kind of crawl inside that experience.
Every child who's born is born with a certain number of brands stuck to his skin. The newborn is obviously the #1 target of any brand that wants to follow you from cradle to grave. And if they can capitalize on your very death for a little added profit, all the better.
In North America, there are at least 40 million people under the age of 14. In terms of demographics, this is the first sizable generation since the post-war baby boomers. Their buying power is estimated at $20 billion. Their parents were into cars, drugs, and rock and roll. In a brand-driven consumer society, this new generation is into designer labels, and their enthusiasm is very lucrative. Branding's impact on youth is a topic on which the experts are divided. While some believe that the Y generation is better equipped to deal with branding since their birth coincided with the rise of this phenomenon, others think this new generation lacks guidance and is more vulnerable to the lure of the brands than previous generations. Who knows? Perhaps they're simply ambivalent.
I find it difficult to come up with a binary answer to a question about youth, because I think each and every one of them develops his own, sometimes critical way of dealing with the consumer society, of which they are also the biggest fans.
From the day they're born, they're bombarded with slogans and logos, and they develop a way of playing with brands which for them is a sign of their freedom. But real freedom lies not in mocking them or changing them, but rather in ignoring them, which means building a life in which brands play only a marginal role.
No matter how you look at it, Generation Y provides proof positive of the hold brands now have on individuals, and it forces us to take a good look at ourselves.
Brands are part of a broader modern discourse on the frantic quest for happiness and bliss. They promise some form of immediate gratification. Basically, they try to sell us on the idea that the purchase of some item, a pair of shoes, eyeglasses, a fragrance, will bring a rush of peerless pleasure. Simply put, it says, if you buy me, I guarantee you ecstasy. It will be expensive, but it will certainly be a lot easier than 15 years of exercise and transcendental meditation.
Today, you'll find brands in our museums, our concert halls, our schools. Few areas are unaffected. This invasion is hardly innocuous. Beyond the quest for space to advertise this proliferation of brands, there's also the quest for meaning. From the marketing of products to the marketing of ideas, more than ever, brands need to create meaning. And the best and fastest way to achieve this is to co-opt culture and popular icons. In this way, even rap, the music of rebellion, has sometimes been co-opted by certain brands for its confrontational energy. When Pepsi sponsors the tour of a pop music star like Britney Spears, it's a way for the brand to identify with eternally renewed youthfulness. When Roots offered to dress all Canadian athletes for the Winter Olympics, it was as much about visibility as it was about tying into the history and nobility of the Games.
And I think it's the main driving force is the association with the athletes, create the team spirit and energy through the clothing. Because if you look good, you feel good, and if you feel good, you play well. And that's the motto of Roots Athletics. If one child walks into this store, buys a t-shirt or a hat, and gets inspired to participate in the Olympics later on in their life, then we've accomplished something.
My roots? Well, I'd have to say my friends, my sports, and being here, which is all about spiritual opportunity.
And when Absolute Vodka uses contemporary artists, the idea is still to establish meaning. More and more, we are finding ourselves besieged by advertising slogans that communicate orders, values, ideologies. The impact of brands appears to be extending beyond simple invitation to buy. What brands are now offering could best be described as ready to think.
For instance, I see a formula taken from the philosopher Nietzsche, become what you are. The danger in this case, of course, is to have a very superficial interpretation of this line, because in the case of this particular product, I think they understood or wanted us to understand that becoming what we are means we're already there. Yet, in fact, in Nietzsche's mind, for all I know, this is not the meaning of the line at all. Becoming what we are is to be what we already are, but have not yet finished becoming. So, I suppose that it also means working on yourself. So, the meaning is distorted.
It is troubling to note how advertising appropriates values and turns some brands into champions of a particular concept of life.
Certain specific brands aim beyond a strictly commercial framework and invest in philosophy and religion, in spirituality, and present themselves as substitutes for the major denominations. This is not only much more frequent, it is also more dangerous, because then the market per se extends beyond the framework of trade and seeks to be perceived as holder of the solution to the major problems of the world. And at that point, we get into a very Western view of a spirituality of commerce.
Finally, brands fill a vacuum. It is no longer considered a good form to be preachy, and moral values no longer hold the importance they once did in our society.
When your life flashes before your eyes, make sure you've got plenty to watch.
But the desire for the meaning is still there. So brands are just opportunists. They come in and they do their market research and they find out what people want. And what they want are not more running shoes, not more computers, not more lattes. What they want is meaning, belonging, being part of a group. They're looking for something more than brands. They're looking for something more than products. And so brands just fill that vacuum.
Hey, I'm not a lumberjack or a fur trader. And I don't know Jimmy, Sally, or Susie from Canada, although I'm certain they're really, really nice. I have a prime minister, not a president. I speak English and French, not American.
In English Canada, it took a beer commercial to revive patriotism with a message more powerful than anything the government could come up with.
Canada is the second largest landmass, the first nation in hockey, and the best part of North America. My name is Joe, and I am Canadian.
Thank you.
The strange thing about Canada's brand is that private companies like Molson and Roots have done a better job of basically taking the Canada brand and attaching it to their clothing or beer companies than Canada has in attaching it to its own country. So I would say that probably from a branding perspective, Canada's a bit of a failure.
Particularly when you consider that Roots, which has become a Canadian icon, was founded back in 1973 by two Americans from Detroit who loved the great outdoors and wide-open Canadian spaces.
I think that when you say Roots, you immediately think Canada. I think that goes back to the 70s when Don Green, the co-founder of Roots, and myself, we'd go to Italy and we'd see Gucci, Milan. We'd see Hermes, Paris. And you know, we said nobody has ever put Canada on clothing. And then we thought, Roots, Canada. And I think there's a great association there.
A surprising journey that demonstrates the power of brands when they connect with the right idea. In France, for soccer's 1998 World Cup, Adidas sang the praises of a French victory during an advertising campaign that effectively replaced talk of multiracial integration.
Merci.
Merci.
Merci. Merci. Merci. Merci.
Adidas melded with a soccer team to become a synonym of pride. And when Adidas sponsored the world's leading rugby team, New Zealand's All Blacks, the brand successfully appropriated the team's authenticity and historic heritage. Most of the values communicated in this manner are attractive: ambition, the quest for excellence, multiculturalism, or integration. A daring pioneer, Benetton succeeded in pushing the marketing of ideas further than ever by linking its advertising to great causes. But after taking on one major cause after another, and generating a lot of controversy, the brand recently settled down, returning to its initial theme, the brotherhood of man. Despite this about-face, Benetton continues to challenge us on the line between goodwill and the exploitation of human misery.
It is so obvious that Benetton is thumbing its nose at multiculturalism, anti-racism, and tolerance. In the final analysis, its only real purpose is to sell its products any way it can, and in that regard, it has truly done a disservice to corporate ethics. What's worse is that, using commercial values, they try to sell us moral, philosophical, or religious values that should not be confounded with issues of trade and negotiation. It really confuses things.
You don't have to be just idiot like everybody in advertising world is to be serious. You can be serious in advertising also by doing serious things.
Obviously, brands sometimes promote positive values. But there's something disconcerting about the notion that they could become the sole defenders of those values. In the end, will their exploitation by business dilute great ideas?
Now, if we sort of broaden the lens and look at what our culture looks like and who's providing meaning, what we see is essentially a terrain where absolutely everything is being privatized, including ideas, including life forms, and this is what people are rebelling against. And my problem with things like the Benetton campaigns is the way in which they treat ideas and political beliefs as commodities, right? I think ideas matter, and I think ideas are not commodities.
Once they've appropriated certain values, some brands venture into the political arena, debunking communism and mocking all great ideological currents.
Brands have been swept into this abyss that appeared after the fall of the Berlin Wall, where all great ideologies favoring the betterment of current conditions died. And so, since politics have tended to shrink like a diminishing asset, brands found themselves swept into a space vacated by both secular ideologies and religions, which also tend in Europe anyway to disappear, or at least to be confined to a private place.
As a result, the economy could well become our political, religious, even moral model, with brands becoming our new myths. 50 years from now, no one will really remember the story of Ulysses, but our children will be very familiar with the stories of Nike, Coke, or Nintendo, these great, indestructible heroes. Does thinking still stand a chance against the message of the brands? Every day, the Western consumer is exposed to an average of 4 hours of television.
Your living room is the factory. The product being manufactured is you.
add to this onslaught radio commercials, billboard ads, newspaper advertising. All in all, exposure to brands in their advertising is massive. Today, brands would appear to have a much stronger impact than ideas, which makes it hard to believe that they have no impact on us. If brands impose this new ready-to-think approach, and if our young people make them their point of reference and spiritual fodder, then perhaps we have truly failed as a society.
Yes, brands are filling a need, but as a society we have to accept some responsibility for why we weren't filling it instead of them. So I think the reason why people are rebelling against brands has to do with precisely because they have promised so much and delivered so little. And by delivered so little, I don't mean in terms of the products. I mean in terms of their actual impact on our societies and cultures.
Indeed, there may actually be reason to believe that brands have gone too far and that young people are starting to demand more. A form of activism is setting in.
We oppose a vision of the world that looks like Disney, that tastes like Coke, and it smells like shit.
So you have this generation that has grown up fully branded, everything for sale. And instead of completely buying into it like some of their peers are, they are absolutely rejecting it. And they are reclaiming the idea of unbranded space, of the commons.
On essaie d'avoir une société démocratique, une société où tout le monde a droit de parole.
It doesn't matter that this resistance is marginal. The brand's existence depends on our desire. Any rejection, no matter how limited, weakens it.
And I think you see it in the growing protest movements in Quebec City, Seattle, Genoa. And what people are saying on the streets is, "Our world is not for sale," which is the José Bové's sort of slogan. And it encompasses the themes that run through this movement. And the theme is a rejection of the privatization of every aspect of life. Branding is one part of it, but it's not the only part of it. It's taking place within a broader political and ecological context of privatization.
We can take some comfort in the fact that, because there are so many of them, no single brand can become a dogma.
If the alternative to a society with brands is a society devoid of brands, all that means is that we are in a society devoid of competition, and that is a society with no opposing views, a society in which we would have one product for each brand. What we would end up with is a dogmatic society with no opposing view, no opposing power. In short, a society with no freedom, no balance, and so to some extent, a totalitarian society.
D'une certaine manière, une société totalitaire.
I don't have any desire to live in a blank world without any signs in it. But I do think that the importance of brands in terms of being primary providers of meaning and the dominant communicators, I don't think that that's going to hold. I think what we're seeing is not an anti-globalization movement around the world, but a pro-democracy movement. And communications is a major part of that.
So with brands having become so powerful, the economy has suddenly emerged as the ruler replacing the ruler, a religion replacing religion. But I think we're really coming to the end of this phenomenon. We're already realizing that while the market is an irreplaceable tool for creating wealth, it cannot replace other institutions and social authorities.
Aux autres institutions et aux autres instances sociales.
It may well be that the route to a better balance lies at the very heart of the problem itself. Could it be that by pretending to be the great thinkers, brands have made us realize that thinking is somewhere else?
Obviously, to some extent, being surrounded by brands, and more importantly, by the products that carry those brands and provide us with services and pleasure, etc., meets a short-term need. But in the mid and long term, it's easy to see that people continue to seek meaning and values, and when all is said and done, they look for them elsewhere.
What needs to be reintroduced into this world is a public life, public places. In other words, places that are neither a simple biological recreation of our private lives, nor a simple consumer activity, but a truly public place, a place where men and women come together, talk, debate the issues, communicate. Community life is more than just millions of people trying to choose the best watch or the best food. So perhaps providing a counterbalance consists in recreating public places in those very areas where commerce is trying to take over our entire lives.
L'entièreté de la vie.
The world according to brands is a world of seduction and ease. The world of ideas, on the other hand, is one that requires effort. Have we really abdicated our role as thinking beings, or are we prepared at this critical time to take stock of our situation? Are brands accessories, or have they become essential to our lives? It's up to us to decide how important brands will be in our lives. We can love them or hate them, but we should never lose sight of the fact that the part they play in our lives is anything but innocuous. The front line of freedom is conscience.